Okay, so we're going to be briefly discussing chapter 1. And what I wanted to make sure that we discussed, or I got to tell you in person, is that this chapter is going to be a lot of different terms. And some of it's going to be sociology terms because that is what we're looking at, kind of the sociology of sports within society. So there are some key terms that I need you to understand, which will make the whole 6 weeks a lot easier, but I don't want you to get too caught up in the sociology piece of it. So you're going to look at these lecture notes pretty detailed. There's, 30 plus slides. And what I want to make sure that you guys understand is that there's concept, theories, and research methods. And as we work through these, I want you to understand and know the definition of culture. I want you to have an understanding of what social interaction is and social structure. So specifically, how do those work within our environment? So when I like to discuss these three, I like to use Wartburg as the example. So culture, the shared way of life of how we understand the people around us. Think about what that looks like with Wartburg when you're living on campus. Social interaction, people taking each other in account for in the process. So we look at others and we take into account, like, how is that going to make them feel? Is this acceptable? And then social structure, this idea of like, how do we build our relationships? How do we shape, do we take in the shape that people live, how they work and play? As we continue to move on with this lecture, a couple other areas I want to point out is going to be the section on play versus dramatic spectacle. So play is kind of for its own sake. The results are internal. You just do it for fun. Where dramatic spectacle is a performance meant to entertain and dazzle other people. So as we're starting to define sports, and in chapter 1, they're going to talk a lot about how do you define sports. I want you to think about this. What is sports? If someone came up to you and said, please give me the definition of sports, what would you say? And then what would constitute as a sport? We're adding sports at Wartburg currently, and, there's all sorts of discussions of what is a sport. And I think a lot of times a big debate comes from is cheerleading a sport? That's the first sport that people think of, or activity, however you want to define it, as is this a sport? So how would you define it? As we continue on here, the pros and cons, the book's going to talk extensively of why it's good to define sport. It gives us structure. It gives us a way to, put theories towards things and study things. The cons to defining sports and making sports into a bubble is that that's exactly what you're doing. You're kind of pigeonholing it. And sports are tough. It's tough just to say this is what a sport is when you really think about it. If we continue on, again, chapter 1 is going to be really heavy with definitions and just kind of introducing you to the meat of what we're going to be discussing this whole entire 6 weeks. So, one thing I want to make sure that I point out to all of you is as you're working through this, lecture, I have it up right now, the PowerPoint, is I want you to have a good idea. I want you to get to the slide, The Great Sports Myth. This book and this class is sometimes going to be difficult because we really look at some of the negative sides of sport. And what chapter 1 really talks about is this idea that sports is great. If you participate in sports, it does nothing but teach you life lessons, makes you a great leader, teaches you how to be a team player, whatever the definition is. However, this book, we're going to kind of look at kind of the negative sides too of sports and the cheating and the lying and just that there's other things that sports brings out that aren't so positive. So make sure you read extensively on that kind of great sports myth. This book will kind of talk about too briefly the difference between sociology and psychology. That's important just to have to know. Sociology is going to be the actions and how we our relationships with other. Where psychology, when we're talking about, we're using psychology to study this, it's more about, studying the behavior in terms of, attributes and processes for each individual. So make sure you have a good understanding of that section. Continuing on, again, I keep saying this, but chapter 1 is really just about what is sports, how do we study it, why should we study it is another big thing. If you are not interested in sports whatsoever, understand it's going to be a part of your life. It's one of these things that in our society, in the United States, we really value sports. We just do. I mean, think about, one example really quick, your high school. If your basketball team made it to state, most schools give you the day off or allow you to get out of school. So, I mean, we value sports. Super Bowl, takes over on a Sunday kind of mentality. So, one of the slides here specifically talks about family, economy, the media, politics, and religion. Sports is within all of that. So it is important for us to study and understand how it not only affects us as individuals, but our society. So the next part and the last part of this lecture I want to make sure I stress about is these ideologies. We will be using them throughout the whole 6 weeks. I need you to know them. I need you to have a good understanding of them. So what is an ideology? So on your lecture here, it discusses that it's a shared interpretive framework that people use to make sense of how to evaluate themselves. So that's a kind of some fancy jargon there. So basically an ideology is how we use, the environment we're in. It's how we use to define what is going on around us, okay? So the first ideology to talk about is, they'll talk about dominant ideologies. Basically, a dominant ideology are the people in control. So if I'm in control, it's my ideas, coming in front of all of you. The people who are dominant are in society are the ones who have the power and the money to influence us in our decisions. The next ideology I want to stress is gender. So the definition is on the slide. I'm not going to read it word for word, but you need to understand ideologies. They are ideas and beliefs. There are not facts and studies done. These are ideas and beliefs that we use to define what is masculine and what is feminine, okay? Ideas and beliefs. This isn't, this is a fact. These are just ideas and beliefs we use to kind of make roles. You're either male or you're female, and you're put into these two boxes. That's what we do as a society. At the bottom of the slide here, it talks about dominant gender ideology is the prevailing notion of common sense about males and females. Well, I mean, it's just common sense, right? Like males are strong and aggressive. They're going to be a little bit more mouthier. Well, with females, I mean, it's just common sense that, they're going to be the ones that stay at home and that want to take care of the children. These are some of those ideas that are just that, an idea and a belief, not necessarily something that is true. Or, I would ask you, when did this all start to come about? The next one is race ideology. Again, same thing. So you have ideas and beliefs that we use to classify humans based on the color of their skin, okay? So, and we say, okay, the color of your skin is this, so that means you're also this intelligent. It means that you're also this good at sports. That's what race ideology is. Race ideology, I have a yellow highlighted there in the lecture notes. Race ideologies, they vary around the world. So our ideas and beliefs here in the United States are very different other places, which I think is very fascinating, and we'll get into that more in later weeks. The next ideology is social class ideology. These are ideas and beliefs that are widely shared to evaluate people on how much money they have. So specifically, economic success, failures, this idea of the American dream, which the slide has, meaning like if you work hard enough, you can get to wherever you want to be. And so social class kind of puts us in certain categories, and as it says down here, competitive sports provide vocabulary to share these stories and reaffirm it. So we've heard the stories, this kid came from nothing, he had no resources, and now he's in the NBA. I mean, we've heard these stories. And again, it's just ideas and beliefs that, if you have this, you're going to get there. If you don't have this, you're not going to get there. And we'll get into that more in detail later on. The last ideology that you need to know is the ableist ideology. So this is ideas and beliefs widely used to identify people as physically or intellectually disabled. It's our way of justifying how we treat them. This one is a very difficult topic because we will have a lot of discussion about, as a society, we've just decided, well, I'm sorry, you can't do this. Who has decided that? We're going to get into what is considered an able body and who made that decision. Because I would argue with our women's soccer team, for example, we have fitness testing and things like that. So who decides what level that you are capable of participating in? If I have a fitness test, I would never tell someone who can't do the fitness test that you can't play soccer, right? Well, that's the same kind of mindset. Well, you're in a wheelchair. You can't do this. Why? Who said that? So we'll get into that more and later on in this idea of like, what are normal abilities? Who defines what normal abilities are? So as we continue on, sports are a big part of the whole society. There's a cute cartoon talking about how people will postpone weddings, and one of my friends actually ran a race on the day that she got married, and families will skip vacations to go to baseball tournaments. So sports are kind of engrossed in this idea that we will also shape our lives around them. So that was kind of that first chapter, some of the things I wanted you to take away. And now what I want you to do, if you haven't already, get the lecture up. You can listen to me again or just go through the PowerPoint slide by side. But those were the things that I wanted to make sure that I defined a little bit more in depth. So I hope that was helpful. Chapter 1, the next video will obviously be Chapter 3.